Michael Rose had worked for the Lancashire Police for 7 years. He enjoyed his job because he lived and worked in a small village where he knew many people by name. Despite being only 33 years old, he had an old-fashioned way about him, friendly, caring, and always ready to help. He was fond of the people in Pendle Lee, and they liked Sergeant Rose too. Crime wasn't a big issue there. Days passed by slowly at the police station since Pendle Lee wasn't bustling with activity like bigger towns or cities. The village itself was beautiful, with a church built in 1376 and houses standing for a very long time. The pub, called the White Witch, was hundreds of years old, and a river flowed on the village's edge through fields and woods, especially enchanting on summer evenings. Despite its beauty, there wasn't much for young people to do, leading bored teenagers to often get into trouble. Most of Michael's challenges involved dealing with these mischiefs. He usually resolved issues by talking to the young people and their parents. He rarely had to take anyone to the station in 7 years, having only arrested 5 people in that time. In those 7 years, he found and returned 11 lost dogs to their homes, which some might find boring, but Michael found happiness in it. It was the middle of summer, late at night, during Michael's night shift at the police station. He had been busy with paperwork, even in a small village station with its fair share of bureaucracy. He took a break to have some coffee and registered the newspaper. Harriet, the police station cat, sat on his knee, purring contentedly. "Sorry, Harriet," Michael said, interrupted by something. Michael wanted more coffee but had trouble moving Harriet, the chubby cat, from his lap. Just then, the phone rang, which was odd because late calls usually meant something serious. He answered, identifying the Pendle Lee police station. It was Mrs. White, an elderly woman from the village. She apologized for the late call, mentioning something happening in the cemetery. A group of teenagers often gathered at the Pendle Lee Cemetery, wearing black clothes, playing loud music, and lighting candles. Michael suspected it might be them again. Mrs. White expressed her distress about them disturbing the graveyard where her family was buried. Michael assured her he'd go right away to check it out. About 10 minutes later, Michael arrived at the cemetery gates in his police car. He could see the kids with their music and candles. Near the gates stood a very old, abandoned house where the cemetery caretaker once lived. Over the years, it had become eerie and rundown, with broken windows and climbing plants covering the building. Using his torch, Michael approached the teenagers. The graveyard was lit with candles, and loud music filled the air. Some of the kids were startled by his sudden appearance. Among them was Alex, a 17-year-old whose parents owned the bakery, and Katie, a 14-year-old who should have been home in bed. Michael tried to reason with them, emphasizing that the cemetery was a significant part of their community and hosting a party there was disrespectful. Despite his words, some of the teenagers challenged him, with one suggesting they were trying to make contact with witches. Pendle Lee was in Lancashire and known for its history with witches in the 17th century. Some locals were arrested and accused of witchcraft. People believed they communicated with the devil and caused sickness and death. Stories persisted even after their execution. This history attracted tourists, who could buy witch-related items and visit places like Lancaster Castle. The area had its own spooky tales. The cemetery had graves over 700 years old, and legends spoke of witches gathering at the site of an ancient church. There were stories of them dancing around fires, trying to summon the devil. People also believed in ghosts haunting the cemetery and the caretaker's house, hearing strange noises and seeing lights. Michael, understanding the lack of activities for teenagers, believed organizing youth events might help. However, the village is worried about noise and alcohol. When the kids left the graveyard, he noticed no graffiti, unlike a few years ago when headstones were damaged. He decided to keep an eye on them despite understanding their boredom and frustration. A few days later, Michael was on his usual afternoon shift, which he preferred for the activity it brought. He enjoyed walking around the village, chatting with locals, and stopping by shops. Even Harriet, the cat, preferred these daytime shifts, lounging outside the station on sunny days. Mr. Murphy, an elderly man, often dropped by with fresh vegetables from his allotment. He'd brought some beans that day. Michael was admiring them when his boss called about a burglary at Oswald's Gallery, a place he hadn't visited since his ex-girlfriend Sarah, who loved art, had left for America 3 years ago. Sarah worked in art restoration in Boston, and although Michael wanted to join her, he couldn't secure a police job there. So, he stayed in Pendle Lee while Sarah moved away. The gallery was just outside the village, housed in an 18th century building by John Oswald. Arriving at the gallery, Michael was met by 2 distressed elderly women, Joan and Lottie, both talking at once. They were flustered about the burglary, one blaming herself while the other tried to calm things down. Michael reassured them and suggested they go inside to discuss what happened and start looking for the thief. Once inside, Michael took out his notebook and asked Joan and Lottie about the incident. Joan mentioned that nobody had visited the gallery for over 2 hours, and Lottie admitted leaving the reception area to check new paintings that had arrived for an annual competition. While she was upstairs, someone stole a painting, and she blamed herself. Michael inquired about security cameras, but the gallery didn't have any. Both women claimed they hadn't seen or heard anything. Michael examined the spot where the stolen painting had been hung, named Summer, by an artist named Butterworth, known for his famous paintings in the gallery. He decided to call the crime scene unit and requested a photo of the stolen painting and a check for fingerprints. Lottie provided a large photograph of Summer, explaining its serene depiction of a young woman in an old-fashioned dress under a tree painted in 1951. Michael explained he needed to keep the photo for investigation. In his car, Michael called his boss, Chief Inspector Blake, to report the burglary at Oswald's Gallery. Michael relayed all the details to Inspector Blake, who seemed preoccupied with more pressing city crimes. Blake was frustrated about the lack of security cameras and urged Michael to contact the Art Loss Register, an international database for stolen art. The register helped prevent the sale of stolen art by informing buyers if a piece was stolen. Blake asked Michael to manage the situation since there was no one else available. He stressed the tension due to potential terror alerts and the shortage of officers. After the call, Michael took a moment to breathe before reviewing the photo of the stolen painting, Summer. He wondered about the woman in the painting and whether she was real or a creation of the artist's imagination. At the station, Michael contacted the art loss register and gathered details about the stolen painting. Meanwhile, he interviewed villagers, hoping someone had seen suspicious activity. Simultaneously, the crime scene officer searched the gallery for fingerprints, which would be checked in the police database. The police would match any fingerprints found at the crime scene to identify the thief. Over the next 2 days, Michael worked hard, putting up signs asking for information about the burglary and questioning villagers. Despite some sightings of visitors, no one had acted suspiciously. Michael distributed copies of the stolen painting's photo to local art shops and contacted colleagues in nearby cities, hoping for leads. At the station, he displayed the photo, feeling increasingly determined to find the painting, almost as if he wanted to bring the beautiful woman in the picture back to the gallery. His intense focus on the painting drew joking comments from other officers, but Michael's attention remained fixated. His interactions with villagers decreased, and even Harriet, the cat, seemed affected by Michael's preoccupation. He relentlessly pursued leads, visiting auction houses and art-selling places even during his off-duty hours. 5 days after the theft, Joan from the gallery called with distressing news. Lottie, her colleague, had been injured in another theft. A painting was stolen, and Lottie was pushed down the stairs and left unconscious. Michael rushed to the gallery, then accompanied Joan to the hospital, deeply concerned about Lottie's condition. They waited anxiously for updates from the doctor. Michael was eager to speak with Lottie once she regained consciousness, hoping she might have seen the thief. However, he could only wait anxiously for updates on her condition. In the meantime, he needed to inform the art loss register about the second stolen painting, Evening in June, another work by Butterworth, depicting a woman resembling the one in Summer. This time, the woman was seated outside with a book in hand, dressed in a purple outfit. Michael found it curious that both paintings featured the same woman, Sylvia, who happened to be Tristan Butterworth's wife and often modeled for his artworks. Michael speculated that the thief might have an obsession with Sylvia, prompting him to steal paintings featuring her. Joan suggested delving into the gallery's archive, filled with information about Sylvia and the Butterworths. The next day, Michael returned to the gallery, which was now planning to install security cameras. Joan guided him to the archive, offering him access to the Butterworths' photographs, letters, and information about their artworks and exhibitions, while making him a cup of coffee. Joan entrusted Michael with the gallery keys and alarm code before returning to the hospital to be with Lottie. Alone in the gallery, Michael sought clues in the past. He sifted through folders of old photographs, mostly featuring Sylvia. Despite their non-relevance to the investigation, Michael found himself captivated by Sylvia's beauty and confident demeanor, depicted in various stages of her life. In many photos, Sylvia appeared with Tristan, often in picturesque landscapes or on a terrace resembling the one in Evening in June. They seemed joyful, especially in pictures labeled as their honeymoon in Cumbria in 1950. Other photos showed a man named Nigel with Tristan and Sylvia, enjoying picnics and gatherings. Michael then delved into old letters, primarily written by Sylvia to Tristan. He got absorbed in Sylvia's words, feeling like he was transported into her world. Curious, he examined letters addressed to Sylvia from a man named Nigel Huxley, written during World War II. Some were serious, detailing war experiences, while others were light-hearted, mentioning parties and friends. Huxley's letters to Sylvia were marked with deep affection, and Michael made a note of Nigel's name, hoping to find more about Sylvia. After spending hours in the archive, he decided to head home, eager to return soon for further investigation. But before leaving, he revisited one specific photo of Sylvia on a beach, looking serious rather than smiling. Michael felt an inexplicable connection, as if she was looking directly at him. He impulsively slipped the photo into his pocket, feeling a sudden sense of guilt for the unexpected theft, despite never having stolen before. Driving home at night, Michael passed the cemetery and noticed a faint light, possibly a candle or a torch, among the graves. Concerned that the teenagers might be there again, he stopped at the gates, grabbed his torch, and entered the cemetery. However, the light had vanished, leaving him in the moonlit, eerie graveyard. Although he didn't believe in ghosts, the atmosphere made him uneasy, and frustration built as he suspected the teenagers might be hiding and waiting for him to leave. Michael decided to switch off his torch, hoping to catch the kids in the act. However, as a cloud obscured the moon, darkness enveloped him. He found himself in complete silence and blackness until he noticed a faint light near the old caretaker's house. As he approached and called out, the light disappeared, and when he shone his torch on the house, he discovered a peculiar symbol painted on the door, 3 stars within a circle. Despite trying to enter, the door wouldn't budge, and upon peeking through the windows, Michael saw only empty, decrepit rooms covered in cobwebs. Suddenly, a ghostly laugh echoed around him, and before he could react, he felt a sharp pain in his head, collapsing to the ground. When he regained consciousness, Michael found himself lying in the grass, his clothes damp and blood on his hands. Feeling unwell, he managed to return to his car and drive home. The next morning, he went to the station to report the incident and inquired about Lottie's condition at the hospital. Despite his head still aching, Michael decided against visiting a doctor immediately, prioritizing his responsibilities. He arranged for the questioning of the teenagers involved in the incident and attempted to search online for information about Nigel Huxley, hoping to uncover details about the stolen paintings or Sylvia. Michael found out that Nigel Huxley, a nearby sculptor, was 85 years old and lived in a large mansion. He considered Huxley a suspect in the art thefts. Believing that Huxley's proximity to the gallery, his knowledge of art, and his past association with Sylvia made him a likely suspect, Michael decided to pay him a visit. He put out some food for Harriet, the cat, who seemed neglected lately due to Michael's intense focus on the paintings and the case. Dismissing interactions with other villagers, he set off to Huxley's grand mansion on the edge of the village. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the housekeeper, who seemed reluctant but eventually allowed him in. In the living room, Michael noticed a striking painting of Sylvia, titled Young Woman with Flowers, gifted by Tristan Butterworth to Huxley. Enthralled by the painting, Michael barely shifted his gaze, even when offered tea and biscuits. Engaging with Huxley, he began their conversation. Michael introduced himself to Nigel Huxley and brought up the art thefts at the Oswald Gallery, mentioning Lottie Bingley's condition in the hospital. He pointed out the significance of the stolen paintings portraying Sylvia and suggested that someone might be obsessed with her. Huxley admitted his deep affection for Sylvia and revealed their intertwined history, emphasizing that he hadn't stolen the paintings. Michael, unable to search Huxley's house without a warrant, left after the conversation. Recognizing potential connections between Huxley and the stolen paintings, he planned to ask Chief Inspector Blake for a search warrant. Later that night, instead of solely focusing on the investigation, Michael found himself deeply immersed in thoughts about Sylvia's life and whereabouts. Intrigued by Sylvia's persona, he made a personal visit to the gallery's archives. Amidst his professional duties, Sylvia's image lingered in his thoughts, remaining a youthful, enchanting figure in his imagination. He held onto her photo in his wallet, silently hoping for her continued beauty and well-being, even though she would likely be elderly now. Before heading to the gallery, he informed Joan Potts of his intended visit to the archives. Michael encountered graffiti on the Oswald Gallery walls matching symbols he'd seen earlier. Investigating, he found a broken window and signs of a struggle, possibly involving the thief who left traces of blood. Police assistants arrived, and they found evidence but no immediate suspects. Later that night, Michael visited the gallery again, discovering 2 teenagers responsible for the graffiti. However, the situation escalated when they heard a scream from the caretaker's cottage. Rushing to the scene, they found Katie, frightened, claiming to have seen a witch inside the burning building. Risking his safety, Michael entered the blazing house and discovered an elderly woman, Agnes, trying to save paintings, including ones featuring Sylvia. Agnes, suffering from Alzheimer's disease, had been living in the old cottage, stealing to survive. In the end, Sylvia was taken to an old people's home, unable to remember recent events due to her condition. Michael, visiting regularly with Nigel Huxley, listened to her nostalgic stories. Despite her altered appearance, Michael acknowledged the enduring beauty in Sylvia's eyes, the only thing that hadn't changed.